prepare, when you've had half an hour to prepare to speak.
Good evening, and welcome to Keeping the Beat, an engaging web series hosted live by TNMEA in partnership with the CMA Foundation. Tune in weeknights, Monday through Thursday at 8 p.m. Central Time, to learn from and interact with music professionals from around the globe, representing every facet of the vast world of music. Today is Wednesday, April 15th, and for those of you who don't know me, my name is Kalena Bovell, and I am the assistant conductor of the Memphis Symphony Orchestra, and I am also the conductor of the Memphis Youth Symphony. Tonight, I will be talking with you all about my life as a conductor and the very unorthodox journey I took to get here. I encourage you all to interact by replying to this live video stream with your questions and your comments, which I will be more than happy to respond to throughout the hour with the assistance of my good friend and colleague, Armand Kevanyan, who is actually joining us from California via Zoom. So Armand, thank you so much for being here. One disclaimer is that while this is being live streamed, it will remain on the Keeping the Beat Facebook page for future reference. So as such, your comments will also remain part of the stream. So no shenanigans. All right, so I can't really talk about my introduction to conducting without talking about my introduction to music. I don't come from a musical family. Both of my parents come from Central America, Panama to be exact, and they came to this country like most people did during that time, hoping for a chance at a better life and also hoping for a chance at better opportunities. And the only way to get those two things for them was to have, better education. So I started singing when I was 9 years old, and by chance, it was in elementary school, and so the choir at the school ran around to every single classroom, and she pulled each kid aside and basically said, sing this note and see if you can hold this pitch. Now, I was incredibly surprised at the fact that I could both sing a note and hold a pitch, because before that time, music never even came into my mind as something that I was interested in.
Will they still be able to hear?
I don't know.
That's the thing I'm worried about. What, babe? Yeah, they can't hear when I do that.
That singing was what I was going to do for the rest of my life. But then middle school happened. So when I got to 6th grade, everyone had to take some type of music class, whether it was choir or instrumental orchestra. And so because I knew that I was going to sing, I had already made that decision that I wanted to be in choir. But because of scheduling conflicts, they put me into the beginning strings class, which one, I was extremely upset about. But also, I didn't know anything about orchestras. I had never seen a live orchestra. I didn't know anything about orchestral instruments. So I felt really out of place being So I remember my teacher was going around to all of the students asking us what we wanted to play. Now again, I knew nothing about the string family.
Hey, do you
So
not
we
hear
got
her
to
at all?
music, and I remember very proudly sitting in my seat and saying, I want to play the flute. And he looked at me and he goes, what are you, an idiot? Go get a violin. And so
Oh dear. He was like, put your wine away. Oh dear. Can you hear her now? Okay. Do you mean to have her stop? You mean to turn off? She can. I'm sorry, y'all. You can? Oh shit. Okay. Dave's so mad. It's not. Okay, I'm gonna abort. Okay. All right, bye. Oh no.
get so far.
Kalena, can I actually ask you to pause on that note? Actually, we're having a little bit of a sound issue with echoes. So as soon as I get the heads up, I'll let you know.
Okay. We get so far.
Kalena, can I actually ask you to pause on that note? Actually, we're having a little bit of a sound issue with echoes.
All right, what now? Is it better? Okay. You can't hear me talking right now. Oh my God. Yeah, he goes, can they see your wine? I was like, no. Oh, jeez Louise. Okay. All right. I guess we'll tell Chelsea to tell Armand to tell her to maybe start over. Oh dear. I don't know. Okay. Okay, I'm muted, so I don't know what to do. Okay. So embarrassing.
Okay, Kalena, you can go right ahead. Sorry about that.
Okay, they're starting again.
No worries. Thanks, Armand. So where was I? So I was talking about the fact that I was 11 years old and the fact that I didn't start taking lessons until I was 18. And so one of the questions that I tend to get often is, why did you start lessons so late into your training? And the answer is really simple. It's because there was no one around to educate me or my parents on what the next steps in my journey should have been. So my parents honestly didn't know that if you had a kid who was serious about music, you got them private lessons. I mean, nowadays you can ask your music teacher, you can go to a music store for recommendations, or you can ask word of mouth. My parents didn't know to do those things. Another thing that was a huge barrier as to why I started lessons so late was because I didn't know anything beyond high school. That mean I didn't know that music programs existed that I could have taken part in. So, as an example, there was a music conservatory that was honestly around the corner down the street from my high school that I didn't know about. And the only reason my parents and I discovered this is because one Saturday morning we were going to the store and I was seeing all these kids who didn't go to my high school carrying musical instruments. So I remember we pulled over and we went inside to inquire, and that's how I discovered that there was this music conservatory. So of course, later we joined. Another thing that was I also didn't know that there were summer camps that I could have gone to. And I think one of the biggest barriers that my family and I faced when it came to my musical journey was the fact that finances were not a very big thing within my family. Meaning, if something was deemed non-essential, then there wasn't money for that. And private lessons cost money. And also owning a quality instrument cost money. So in middle school, I was using the school instrument, which I was totally happy about because it was an instrument that I could use. But, as I started getting serious, my parents kind of thought, okay, maybe we should get her own instrument. And I remember my mom buying me this really poorly made $200 instrument from the Fingerhut catalog. And it sounded like cardboard. And so I know a lot of you are probably wondering, so what exactly does cardboard sound like? Firewood. That's exactly what it sounded like. But again, it was my instrument and I was incredibly glad to have it. So I'm going to pause right there for 1 second just to see if there are any questions or comments on anything that I've kind of said so far.
So far, Kalena, we don't have any comments, so you can continue on with discussion.
All right, fantastic. So just remember, everyone, I am really looking forward to interacting with you all and keeping this conversation going. So no questions are off limits, and also would love to hear your thoughts and your comments just about anything that you might have on your mind. So as I continued my musical journey, I graduated high school in 2001 knowing that I was going to do music. The only problem was I had no idea how I was going to get there. And I think throughout my entire high school time, I met with a counselor once. And it was a little bit before graduating high school. And it was basically for the counselor to see if I felt good about the colleges that I had applied to. And that was about it. And I remember thinking, well, I applied to 3 schools, mainly because it's what my friends did. And I figured that's what everyone does. So why not? And you can only imagine how relieved I felt when I got rejected from these 3 schools, because I didn't feel ready to, I guess, to go to college, but I also didn't really feel prepared in high school for what came next. So I did the thing that was best for me, which was I went to community college. I enrolled in Santa Monica College in 2001, and Santa Monica is one of the top community colleges in the LA County. And right off the bat, I declared myself as a music major. And I made sure that I was taking all of the required classes that would allow me to transfer to a 4-year institution. And I think one of the greatest things about Santa Monica is that I was around a lot of people who were serious about music, but then it also allowed me to discover that there was a symphony orchestra at the school that I could play in. So it was during my 3rd year at Santa Monica that I decided I'm really serious about being a violinist. And so I'm going to join this orchestra to continue improving on my skills. So once 2004 happened, I had finally completed all of the coursework needed to transfer to university. But enter another obstacle. So the one thing that my community college counselor did not tell me, despite our meeting regularly, is that it can be a little bit tricky when you transfer from a public institution, which was my community college, to a private institution, which is the school I ended up going to for university. And that was because private schools can decide how many credits that they want to take from your transferring institution. And so at Santa Monica, I had done a total of 72 credits to put towards my degree program at university. And my university decided that they would take none of my credits. So thinking about, I had spent 3 years at this institution, and now I basically had to start all over. And that was a huge disappointment, because a part of me kind of felt, well, now I had wasted 3 years that I could have put towards something else. But it was also kind of another example of this is something that I didn't know, despite the fact that I was constantly seeking answers. But, you know, life kind of throws you lemons and you have to deal with it. So when I got to community college, I was a music education major with a violin emphasis. And the reason I was a mus ed major was because I had started taking lessons so late, and because I came to my instrument so late, I was constantly being compared to my colleagues. And so there was actually an instance during my sophomore year of undergrad where I was removed from orchestra. So I played all freshman year, and there was no issue. But then sophomore year happened, and basically my music director at the time told me in a separate meeting that I just wasn't good enough compared to my colleagues. And so you have to imagine how that felt for me, because it was kind of like, I remember thinking, but you can't compare me to them because I'm not them, I am me. And it was the first time where who I was as a musician and just as a player, I didn't feel good enough. And so I focused on music education because teaching had always been something that I wanted to do, because I had always loved helping others. And so as part of my degree program, everyone had to take a year of instrumental conducting. And so I remember being in this class, and you know, it took a while before we actually were allowed to get on the podium and start conducting music. And so most of the class was learning the basics. But I remember getting on this podium for the first time and, you know, giving that first downbeat and thinking and having all this sound come towards me. And I remember thinking, how have I never known about this before? Why has no one ever told me about what this is? because I kind of realized there was something about conducting that I couldn't quite put my finger on, but something about it intrigued me, and I just had to learn more about it. So I started auditing all the conducting classes that I could get my hands on through the school. And I was going to all the orchestra rehearsals, and I would sit in the back and I would have my scores. And I didn't really know what was going on, but all I knew was it was something that I just had to keep pursuing. And also, I started doing a lot more work as an auditor in the conducting classes than most of the students in the classes themselves. And so what's interesting is these conducting students would always have a lab orchestra final, which is where they got to conduct the orchestra. And so I never actually thought that I would get any podium time, but the teacher said, Kalena, why don't you get up there and see what you can do? And I said, okay. I was super excited. So I got on the podium, did my thing, class was dismissed, and the teacher called me aside and he looked at me and he said, I think I misjudged you. And I was just thinking, oh man, did I really do that poorly? Is this over for me? And he said, I could see you in a graduate program. And he looked at me and he said, I think you might have it. You might be able to do this. And it's when I had made the decision within myself that I wanted to conduct and I wanted to get into a master's program in order to do that. And immediately after, I started taking conducting lessons. And I was taking lessons weekly, and I took summers off because I needed to work in order to save up money to pay for school that fall. But one of my friends had gone to a conducting workshop called the Conductor's Retreat at Madonna. And my buddy came back, and he would not stop talking about this conducting workshop. And he said, I really recommend this to you because it's for conductors of all levels, and I think you would really benefit from what they have to say at this workshop. And so Kalena, I looked into it. Yeah.
On that note, actually, Ed Sargent asks, who was the most influential conductor in your playing career that inspired you to conduct? And do you articulate any movements and style relevant to this individual?
That's a really great question. So, biggest conductor or influential conductor in my playing career. I would honestly have to say Ed. I'm going to say my high school teacher. Mainly because, he was the jazzer and he wasn't the greatest conductor, but the fact that he was so inspirational when it came to music, the fact that, he was willing to give so much knowledge, that just really made me want to pursue music even more. So I definitely owe a lot of where I am today because of my high school teacher and because of just that love of music that he instilled in me. That's a great question.
You have another follow-up question, not necessarily following up to the specific topic, but Chelsea asks, is it intimidating to be a female conductor in a field largely dominated by men?
I think it can be, but I'm going to answer that question in two ways. I think it can be intimidating, one, as a woman conductor, but I think it can also be intimidating as a conductor of color. Because when you look in this field, you don't have a lot of people that are representative of me. Maybe 20, 30 years ago, we didn't have many women conductors in the field, whereas now we have Marian Alsop, we have Mayan Chen. We have so many different people. So I think it's less about intimidation and it's more about being able to actually solidify that you belong on that podium and that you belong in this field. And actually, I kind of want to go off of something. Is I remember when I was in Orange County and I was having a conversation with a friend. He said, Kalena, you are a really great conductor, but I don't know. There's just something about taking orders from a woman on the podium. And, I remember being so taken aback by that because it was kind of like, you're telling me that I'm good at what I do, but at the same time, you're telling me it's hard for you to take what I do seriously because I'm a woman. So I think it's a mindset that has to constantly change, and I think it is slowly changing. But I think, again, it's less about intimidation, and it's just more about just kind of really taking your spot because I let my work on the podium speak for itself. So that's a great question, Chelsea. Thank you. Any more questions, Armand?
Nope. You can proceed with
All right,
with any topics you'd like to talk about.
Cool. The reason I want to continue with Madonna is because there's a reason why Madonna holds a special place to me. For one, my parents couldn't help send me to this workshop. So I actually had to work 6 jobs. Yes, you heard that correctly. I worked 6 different jobs, not all on the same day, spread out throughout the week in order to be able to pay for this workshop. And, I remember going to this workshop feeling so defeated because I had someone telling me that as a musician, as a player, I wasn't good enough. And so it was kind of like hoping that Madonna would be the thing that would kind of reignite that fire for me when it came to music. And I remember leaving Madonna in 2010 feeling so empowered, feeling so confident, and feeling like I could really do this because there was a session, I will never forget this, there was a session where after I got off the podium, the teacher pulled me aside and he said, you could really be good if you just started believing in yourself. And I felt like that was the moment I decided to kind of take back everything that was taken from me, which was my confidence, my ability, and my skill level as a musician, as a player, and now as a conductor. And I also felt like it was the first time where I knew what I wanted in my life, but I also had a game plan in regards to how I was going to get there. Any questions, comments about that stuff?
No, you can continue going on.
All right. So after leaving Madonna, my game plan was I need to go to grad school. And so I was applying all over the place. And so, one thing I was looking at, what are some of the top schools in the country? So I got offered an audition at Michigan. And then I also got offered an audition at San Francisco Conservatory. Now, this was kind of a milestone in itself because I had only been conducting for maybe a year and a half. And so I was still really new. Technically, I didn't know a lot of music. I didn't know a lot of repertoire, So the fact that I was even asked to audition at these places was fantastic. But San Francisco was really eye-opening. So with Michigan, I didn't get past the first round of auditions. It was a 2-round audition. And while I was disappointed, I remember thinking, that's okay, because I still have San Francisco 2 weeks later. So I took the San Francisco audition, and there was a conducting portion, and I remember thinking, the orchestra keeps slowing down, and I don't know how to stop that, which was basically a representation that I was still a young conductor, but it was the oral skills portion, the listening portion, that really showed me I wasn't ready for this. So we were all in this room, and it was maybe as a 1-sheet paper that maybe had 10 to 15 questions total, right? And I remember everything except for my name and 2 questions were blank. And I remember sitting there feeling so embarrassed and feeling so unprepared. And, when it was time for my interview with the 2 teachers, I remember they addressed my paper, they held it up and they said, how do you explain this? And I had no excuse. I had no reasons. And I remember just saying, I can't. And one of the teachers looked at me and he said, well, how can you tell, let's say your 4th horn player, that they're flat if you can't hear it? And I just kind of looked at him and I said, you're right, I can't. And I remember getting on that plane and thinking, okay, something has to change because I have a bachelor's degree in music, and yet there's so many holes and gaps in my education that need to be filled. And the only way that this is going to happen is I'm going to have to go back to school. And so think about this. It's like I'd already been in community college. I'd already had a bachelor's in music education, and now I have to go back to school. It's not a reality that I really wanted to face, but it was my current reality now. So because I thought I need to make my weaknesses a strength, and I need to make my strengths even stronger. So in 2011, I'm still working my 6 jobs, and I decided to register at Santa Ana College, which was the local college near me, community college near me, that also had music courses that fit within my schedule. So at the same time, it's like I was going to school at night, I was working my jobs, but I was also making my list of grad schools and really trying to prepare a list so that I could be even more of a competitor than I was the year before. And so when I was looking at schools, I was researching locations, meaning, can I see myself living in this place for 2 years? Kansas City was on my list. Couldn't really see myself living in Kansas City, right? I was also looking at what were the financial aid opportunities, meaning how many schools were, or excuse me, how many students were awarded financial aid? What was the matriculation rate? Because I went into debt for undergrad. I couldn't go into debt, even more debt for grad school. And then I was really looking at teachers. Because one thing that San Francisco showed me was that I didn't have the best conducting teacher. And so I started making a list of pros and cons on things I wanted in a teacher and things that I didn't want in a teacher.
Kalena, sorry to interrupt you, but we have a question here from Drew Davidson asks, will you please speak about the future of audience development in the orchestral world, specifically in regards to making sure audiences are representative of the diverse communities our institutions are meant to serve?
That is a fantastic question, Drew. I think when it comes to developing audiences for what we do in the orchestral halls, it really comes back to programming. I think that our programming needs to be reflective of the community that we are serving, and of the people that we are expecting to get into the concert halls. So I'm a big believer in representation matters. And something I also believe is that people can't be what they can't see. And so if people aren't seeing composers or hearing music that is very reflective of either how they grew up, of their culture, then it's going to be very difficult to get them interested in music and get them in the halls. So I think it really comes down to having our music be reflective of our community to really start bridging those gaps and forming those relationships. That's a fantastic question.
Also, you have a very, very quick comment here. Chelsea says, I'm so glad you ended up at Heart. I loved working with you in the Heart Orchestra and Food in the Doors ensemble. You were so receptive to feedback on the podium, and Maestro Cumming was, and always, cool and confident.
Thank you, Chelsea. So Chelsea makes a good point. When I kind of went through my Santa Ana college phase, I got offered 3 auditions during my second round of going through the grad school process. University of Michigan again, which is fantastic because remember I had auditioned their year prior. The Hart School, which was a school I really wanted, and then the Cincinnati Conservatory of Music. So with Michigan, I didn't get offered admission, but I made it to the second round. And that to me is a huge milestone because I couldn't even get past the first round before. With Heart, I remember thinking I have nailed this audition because I felt incredibly prepared, mainly because the week before the audition, I was on spring break. So I was able to spend like 6 to 8 hours a day just studying this music. And then with Cincinnati Conservatory, well, don't ever do this, but because of all the traveling I had done, I mean, I was away from my home for 4 weeks. I ended up getting strep throat, and then I ended up conducting that audition with 102 fever. I don't recommend that. But in case you have to do it, water will be your best friend. But like Chelsea mentioned, I ended up going to the Hart School for 3 years, and it was honestly like the best place for me.
Yes, another question here.
Yeah.
Nita asks, first, speaking of representation, have you met, and I hope I don't butcher this, Maestra Dr. K. George Roberts, a native Nashvilleian? I was more concerned about the Nashvilleian. And the second question,
but I would love to meet that person.
And the second question is, what is your favorite symphonic work to conduct?
Ooh, okay, so now you're opening up a can of worms because I am very quickly going to say Brahms. Like, Brahms, Armand is nodding his head because he knows it's true. So some people have spirit animals. I have spirit composers, and mine happens to be Brahms. And my favorite orchestral work is Brahms' Second Symphony. Because when I was at Madonna, so I conducted the opening section of the second movement from the Second Symphony. And the way I think of it, that is where my conducting life started, with that piece. So everything Brahms, I'm all about. Any other questions, or are we good to keep going?
You can continue on.
All right, cool. So I want to tell you guys now about my transition after grad school into the field. So one thing they don't tell you coming out of grad school is that you are not going to get a job in the field, at least in the professional field. And you're going to have to work many jobs that you might not like. And you're going to have to be okay with that because what it comes down to is you're going to have to do what you need to do in order to get to where you want to be. And so I knew that I wanted to conduct. And once I came out of grad school, I was lucky because I ended up working teaching at a boarding school. So I taught at a school called Loomis Chafee for 4 years, and it was a really cool experience because I did chamber music, I taught orchestra, I taught private lessons, so that allowed me to keep up my violin skills, not by much, but it allowed me to keep them up. But also while at Loomis, I was able to take part in this conducting fellowship called the Chicago Symphonietta, which was all about developing diverse and emerging musicians, conductors, and administrators both on and off the podium. So think about that for a second. For the first time, I was with an organization who was filled with people who looked just like me. Growing up as a classical violinist, I had never seen either black conductors, black violin players outside of Regina Carter. And so to be in Chicago with the Sinfonietta and starting to see an orchestra that is extremely diverse with many people who look just like me, I mean, was completely inspiring. Seems like we have a question?
No, you
okay.
I can always ask you a question, actually.
Yeah,
I was
what do you
thinking
got?
about Kalena. When going back to the grad auditions, if you
Yeah.
had to take maybe one or two of the most important skill sets that you developed in preparation for these auditions, what do you think those one or two, like, cream of the crop skill sets would be?
And one of the easiest things is being an efficient and very clear when it comes to rehearsing. Because I think when you start your conducting training, you think, oh, I have to create all of these imageries and like be kind of ethereal and kind of, very cerebral when you are answering or trying to speak with an orchestra. They don't want that. They want you to be precise and clear so you can get it done in the moment. And the second thing that I would really take away from those experiences is just how hard work it takes to really get into those institutions. Like my first year, again, I was thinking, yeah, this is great. I'm taking conducting auditions. This is fantastic. But the second year, I really understood the work that it took in order to get into those schools or even to get auditions at those schools, which is why I always think the fact that I started conducting in 2009 and was able to get an audition in 2011 and then 2012 and get into a school in 2012, that to me was huge.
I have a comment here from
Yeah.
Julie Hill. She says, hearing your story about struggles and perseverance really resonates with me. I had to take out a personal loan co-signed by my mom for $2,000 to attend a Lee Stevens marimba camp when it first started back in 1991. Wealthy students flew in from abroad and rented marimbas on site. I drove from UT Martin with a marimba in my trunk, praying not to have a flat tire. It was not easy, but something I have always been proud of at the age of 19. Ever since, it's been a mission to make outside opportunities more accessible to those who struggle for access.
That's fantastic, and I love the fact that you just shared that part of your story with me because one thing is when I was at Loomis, a lot of the kids were from affluent families, and we did have some students who were lower socioeconomic and who were on financial aid. But whenever I approach teaching students, it's always from the mindset of I want them to have the opportunities that I never got to have growing up. And so it's always so important to me that I really help a young kid or just really help people in general, students, adults, and that I really try to support them on this journey. Because, I always think, what if I had had X, Y, and Z when I was coming up as a classical musician? Well, you can't think what ifs. The only thing that you can do is continue to pay it forward, which is something that I always strive to do. So thank you so much.
Julie also says here, Kalena, she says, Kalena, are you familiar with the Sphinx organization? I assume so with your mentioning University of Michigan. Andre Dowell, who works closely with the group, was my first private student in rural Western Tennessee.
Oh, wow. That's really cool. I am familiar with Sphinx. Actually, I was at the Sphinx conference, and it was my first conference going this past February. And I mean, it was amazing to see so many musicians of color, at this festival, and then just to also see how many people from around the world that this festival brings together. And so I have recently met Andre. I mean, that's fantastic. And one of my goals, one of my dreams, is to be able to conduct that orchestra someday. So thank you for that.
Kalena, did you want to maybe elaborate on some of your experiences there during the conference?
Oh, yeah. So when I was there with the conference, I was representing the Memphis Symphony Orchestra. And so we got to sit in on the SOPA auditions, which I think it's the Sphinx Orchestral Partnership audition. So Sphinx has different partnerships with many institutions within the United States. And so students apply, and they basically get audition feedback from people from different nonprofit organizations, so different symphony orchestra representatives. So just hearing the talent that is out there from these different institutions and from these different players. So aside from hearing the auditions, I also got to listen to some of the competition. So there is, I guess, the upper level division and then the lower level division for middle school students, and I guess high school collegiate level for the upper division. And again, I mean, it was just incredible to be around this talent and just to see how many people Sphinx is continuing to help since their initial inception. So yes, I am very familiar with Sphinx, and I think they do great things.
Here's a great follow-up question.
Yeah.
Chelsea asks here, how do you think we can get more students of color involved in music, particularly orchestra? In your position as the assistant conductor of the Memphis Symphony Orchestra, how can you make orchestral music more accessible to diverse communities?
That's a great question, Chelsea. I think the first thing it comes down to is kids need to be able to see that there's someone who looks like them before they even gain any interest in doing it. So as I mentioned, I never saw any Black violin players coming up outside of Regina Carter, who's a jazz player. And even when it came to Black conductors, outside of James DePriest, I didn't see any other Black conductors who looked like me when I started becoming serious as a conductor. So I think, if anything, it's really important to establish relationships with these, students of color, and then also kind of showing them how classical music or just music in general can relate to what they do. So I think our jobs as educators is basically showing students what they don't know they need yet, and then somehow getting them to buy into the fact that this can really impact and change your life for the better. The way I say it, music changed my life. And it was because in sixth grade, I had a Black music teacher who saw something in me who wouldn't let me give it up. And then I got to high school, and I had a teacher who saw my drive, who refused to let me, put it down. But then you get to college, and it's like, well, I have someone who's basically saying, no, you're not good enough. But inside, I was thinking, well, then I'm going to show you differently. So again, I think it always comes down to representation matters. And so the more that we can show representation on the performing stage, as well as in the music that we continue to program, I think that's a way that we can really start reaching our students and families of color. I'm glad that you brought up Memphis, because let me tell you, this Memphis Symphony job has been amazing. I mean, I moved here in July of 2019, and just the audition itself was, it was a rigorous process, but I felt like I was prepared for it because I had taken 3 auditions already. I took my first assistant conductor audition in 2017. And the cool thing about that is the fact that I was out of grad school for 2 years, and I was already taking my first audition. That doesn't happen for a lot of people, but for me, it kind of showed that's how persistent I was with wanting to be in this field. And so when I took this Memphis audition, I just remember being so nervous. But at the same time, I already had a relationship here because I was here in 2016 to assist the former music director, Mayan Chen, for her final Masterworks concert. And so a lot of the people that I met in 2016, I was able to see again in 2019. And I remember being on that podium and being extremely nervous. But then in my head, I thought, you're making music with your friends. What's wrong with you? Just have fun, and that's pretty much what it became. And so I remember the next day waking up early. I mean, the audition itself was a very long day. So it was conducting the orchestra. There was a speaking portion, speaking to the community members, community partners, speaking to orchestral members who were part of that search committee. Also going through two different interviews, which I felt like I was really prepared for because I had a community group. I was working with my students. And so I felt like having all of these different things allowed me to develop these skill sets that I hadn't had before. I was also doing a lot of covering with some professional orchestras, like the Hartford Symphony. I was covering for St. Louis Symphony. So I was seeing how these people were interacting with their ensembles, and that allowed me to kind of use that for my audition. So once the audition was over, I remember thinking, God, I'm tired. But I also remember thinking I felt really good about that because all of the experiences, all of the rejections, all of the disappointments that I had had from my 3 previous auditions, I was able to take what I learned from those and apply it to this one. And so I remember getting on that plane the next day, going home and just kind of saying, I'm not thinking about it. It's done. I have to go to work the next day. And I am at the airport waiting for my Uber, and Maestro Bob Moody calls me. And I missed his call because I was trying to fiddle with the Uber, and I said, okay, I'll call him back. So I remember getting home, and I call him up, and he's like, how you doing? I was like, oh, I'm very tired. How are you? And, Bob says, how did you feel about the audition? And I said, I thought it went really well, and he was like, well, he's like, I just wanted to tell you that it was a unanimous decision between the board and myself. We are offering you the job. And I just remember I got really quiet and I just started sobbing, one, because I was so happy, but two, because it was the first time where I felt like every single thing that I had gone through, every obstacle, every challenge, every person telling me that I wasn't good enough, that all of that struggle wasn't for nothing. I mean, it was such an incredible moment. And so I think back to that moment and I just think, it's a moment that I never want to forget because it was validating. It was knowing that for me, I can do this and that I do belong here. So I've been with the Memphis Symphony now for a year, and I've been able, I feel, to meet a lot of people within this community, a lot of different educators. I've got a lot of different community partners. I've also, because of my job, I also have the Memphis Youth Symphony, and I have some amazing kids, both high schoolers and some middle schoolers. And the thing I love about working with my kids is that I see so much talent in them. And I see how I can continue to support them and continue to build them up. And again, make sure that they get the opportunities that I wasn't able to get when I was coming up as a musician. So I'm sure that some people probably have some comments, or some people probably want to know about those journeys.
Kalena, I wanted to bring you back to the topic of inclusion, and maybe you can talk a little bit about what the Memphis Symphony Orchestra and the Youth Orchestra are doing to increase inclusion.
That is fantastic. So within Memphis Symphony Orchestra, what we are doing in terms of inclusion is we are partnering with a lot of our community partners. So as an example, for our Magic of Memphis concert, we did a Black Nativity segment, which was presenting so Black Nativity was written by Langston Hughes. It was basically a lot of different texts taken from church, I believe church gospels and church songs that he set to music himself. So we took this Black Nativity segment and then we partnered with Hattie Lou Theater, which is a Black repertory theater started by Ekendayo Bandele. And, we had an all-Black cast. And so we were presenting the story of the Nativity from a completely different perspective. And we also had, what I think was fantastic was we also paired that with the Soulful Hallelujah, which had the Memphis Symphony chorus. So behind me, you had the people from Hatterley Theater dancing along to the Hallelujah chorus, the soulful Hallelujah. But we also had kids from the Stax Academy of Music, which, these kids are fantastic. So I know during that time to see all of that representation on stage, I remember a lot of people coming up to us afterwards saying that this was a beautiful performance. I'd never seen so many people on stage who looked like me. Another thing that we do is that Memphis Symphony, we go into the community. So we did a concert back in October of last year at the Metropolitan Baptist Church, which is one of the churches that Martin Luther King spoke at. And so, it's a predominantly African-American church. And so we had many people from the community, many people just within the church itself. And we also partnered with the Soulsville Academy Choir, as well as the Stax Academy Choir. And again, it was just so much representation of people of color. And seeing that, within the Memphis Symphony, we are constantly, or at least our music director, is constantly trying to find ways that he can really include people within the community. Because, again, we wouldn't be anything without our community supporters. And the way we gain that support is by reflecting the community that we depend on. And within the Youth Symphony, things that we like to do is I like to switch it up with programming. I mean, so far this year I have done the Danzón number 2 by Arturo Marquez, which was a huge success, because it's taking a little bit of my roots, Latin American roots, and also presenting it for an audience who maybe had never heard this piece before. And also for the kids, it was something that they really wanted to do. So also kind of having just that drive and that want to, do something. I thought that's really important. So those are ways that we have been trying to incorporate diversity and inclusion both on the Memphis Symphony side and on the Youth Symphony side. It's a great question. All right. So I think another thing that I want to talk about when it comes to Memphis Symphony is the fact that I get to go into many different schools because of my education background. So I know that the Memphis Music Initiative is really big out here. And already I've gone into Colonial Middle School. I've gone in, there's another school, pardon me, that I can't quite recall, but being able to work with different teachers out here and just seeing how important music is to Memphis. And so the thing that is kind of different for me and my upbringing is that I remember when my brother was in 6th grade, he got to play saxophone. And I thought, okay, great, when I get to 6th grade, I'll be able to do the same exact things. Only what's the first program that's usually always cut in music education or in just education in general? Music. So by the time I got to my brother's age, there was no music for me, instrumental music at least, there was only singing and choir. But the things that I love about Memphis is just the fact that there is such a high importance on music placed out here. And so from a very early age, as an example, within the Memphis Symphony, we do ORF education concerts. So this idea of the ORF Schulwerk, which is a concept that students at a young age, so basically from K through 5th or 6th grade, they are involved in music with some capacity that involves either singing, dancing, playing recorders, playing mallet instruments, and it's all about using the total self when it comes to music. So with Memphis, we go into 13 different schools throughout the season, and the kids get to play side by side with us during these education concerts. And it's such a great thing for me to see kids who are really involved, but also seeing the parents who maybe have never had any type of exposure to live music to be seeing their kids on stage playing with the Memphis Symphony. And yeah.
I have a comment here from Nita Smith, which I find absolutely very, very cool. She says here, FYI, look up www.colorofmusic.org. This is a network of classically trained musicians of color, we're in Nashville, and sent a virtuoso violinist, an African-American male, who did a masterclass for a middle school choir. The kids loved him.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And you have a... Sorry, go ahead.
No, I said I will definitely look that up. Thank you.
And there's a question from Chelsea here. How much input do you have in programming of the repertoire with the Memphis Symphony Orchestra?
Great question. So I don't have a ton of input for programming. Usually the season is already kind of defined and developed early on by our music director. But if it is a concert that I happen to be conducting, I will have some input. So as an example, when we did our Soul Symphony concert at the Metro Baptist Church, that was a concert that I got to program from beginning to end, which was a really great feeling. We had some gospel tunes on there. We also had pieces for handbell choir, but we also got to introduce the audience to Mendelssohn, Beethoven, Handel. So it was a nice mixture, and I think that's really important too. I think sometimes it can be dangerous to say we're going to do an all one type of concert because you don't want to alienate. So the thing that I loved about this Soul Symphony concert with Metro Baptist was just the fact that we were, because of this community, they were getting soul and gospel, but they were also getting maybe things that they wouldn't have necessarily heard before. Just pretty cool.
Kalena, actually, I had a question here with about 8 minutes left.
Yeah.
I actually wanted to ask you, in a perfect world, how would you see this whole inclusionary, this kind of like oneness? Like, what would you imagine that to be?
Oh my gosh, Armand, you always give me the tough questions.
Hey, listen, we've been friends for 10 years. I think I can afford some tough questions here.
It is very true. Armand and I have been friends for 10 years, so he knows me very well. The way I see inclusivity is I see inclusivity being first starting, again, with programming. Because, again, it's really important that programming reflects the people that we are playing to in a concert hall. I think inclusivity also comes down to what we're seeing as audience members from the stage. Meaning, I would love to see a more wide mixture of people, musicians of color, from African Americans, Hispanics, Latinx, Asian, Native American. There just needs to be much more variety in the people that are on this stage creating the music. I think there should also be a lot more collaboration with our community partners, thinking outside the box a little bit. So, some finding ways to incorporate dance, finding ways to, here in Memphis, to incorporate Hattie Lou, to incorporate new ballet, because these organizations are so important. And then I think the last thing would be kind of also looking at the organization itself and being, sure that the organization is also reflective of that inclusivity. So down from those that sit on the board to those that work in the office staff, to those people that are out in the communities speaking with teachers, speaking with our partners, and those that have a face within that community who are representative of Memphis Symphony or even the Youth Symphony. Very good question. All right, I want to hear some comments from you all. What do you all think? What would you all like to know about me? No question, no comments are off the table. Everything is fair game.
I mean, I'm reading whatever I'm getting, so.
No, that's totally fine. I guess one thing I also wanted to talk about with the Memphis Youth Symphony is that, the program is incredible because we have 3 different orchestras that serve a variety of kids. Now, the thing I love about the Youth Symphony and my being a part of it is just the fact that, the kids can start very young and they can stay in the program and pretty much go work their way up in being in the older group, So we have a prelude strings, we have the string orchestra, and then we have the Youth Symphony. And the fact that my Youth Symphony also gets to play a side-by-side with the Memphis Symphony. And when I think back again to my musical training, those are some of the things I wish I had gotten, mainly because it was, again, I wish that I had been educated to know what resources were out there that existed for me. And so when I think back to my musical training, I think of the fact that, yes, there were many things that I didn't have in my training. But at the same time, the fact that I didn't have those things gave me the drive to get to where I am today. So I always think, well, what if I had started piano lessons sooner? Or what if I started violin lessons sooner? Or, what ifs? Again, it's all those what ifs, but I would not do anything differently. And I wouldn't have, I guess, taken any other route than the one that I have taken so far. So, I'm really thankful for everything that I have been able to take part in. And I always look forward to what's coming up next. So, one thing that I really want to do while I'm out here is be the representation for this community. And I really want to get into the school systems and, start meeting kids. And I also want to start meeting different teachers, and building those relationships, because I feel like it's so important for what we all want to do collectively, which is to inspire our students, make them feel as though they are achieving their best selves. And then, also just making them feel as though they can do anything if they put their minds to it.
Yeah, I have two questions here from separate people, and I'm going to save the one that I know you're most passionate about for the very end, with about 3 minutes left here. The first is Nita asks, have you ever had an African-American music teacher at any point? I know you touched on it earlier, but I wanted to bring that up again.
That's a great question. Actually, yes. So the person who started me on violin in 6th grade was African American, and then the person that I consider my first real violin teacher, Bill Fitzpatrick, is African American. And what's actually funny, I remember the first time I met Bill, we had a lesson, and he had no idea what I looked like, and so I walk into the room and I sit down, and he says, "No one told me you were Black." And I remember I looked at him and I said, "Well, is this going to be a problem for you?" And that's how our relationship started, and it was an amazing relationship.
Two more questions, Kalena.
Yeah.
Here, and I know you're very passionate about this one, but I want to save the very, very special one for the end. What is Keeping the Beat asks, what is your favorite style of music outside of the classical idiom?
Okay, this one always catches people off guard. And, my music director teases me all the time, but I love death metal and like heavy metal, alternative rock, like anything that I can give myself whiplash to, I am all about.
And see, I knew that. I knew you were going to enjoy that one. And I think we're going to have, if we're going to end at, I'm on Pacific time, so I was going to say 7 p.m., but 9 p.m. I'll ask this question also, and Kalena, you can kind of take it over from there. Chelsea asks, what advice do you have for undergraduate music students who might want to pursue professional conducting?
Oh, that's a great question. So firstly, watch as many rehearsals as possible. If you're interested, the only thing that you can do firstly is watch as many rehearsals as possible. Also, try to go to as many symphony concerts as possible, whether that's through the professional orchestra that's in your community or your town, or, if that's the orchestra at the nearby college or even your own school. Also, really brush up on your piano skills, because I think piano is also important as a conductor. And be sure that you keep up on your instrument, whether that's voice or if you are an instrumental player. And I think the most important thing I would also say is try to seek out a teacher if you can, and try to create opportunities for yourself. So even if you're working with like a group of 4 people, just kind of do that and try to conduct through as much rep as possible. And just remember that it's a hard journey, but it's super fun and super rewarding, and just to stick with it. It's a great question. Thank you, Chelsea.
So I haven't gotten the orders to pull the plug yet on the on letting you go, Kalena. But right. Ed asks here, have you ever thrown your baton at a particular section? Percussion or trumpets come to mind?
I have never intentionally thrown my baton, but I have accidentally, like, the baton has flown out of my hand accidentally. And I've also broken a baton while being on the podium, which is never fun. That's a great question, Ed. Thank you.
That looks like all the questions I've got here.
All right.
There's one more. Nita says, please come to Nashville. You are amazing. Your musical journey is amazing. Thank you.
Well, Nita, I will come wherever I am welcomed. So I will definitely see you there. So when I do come to Nashville, I think that you and I should meet up and have coffee and totally talk through our journeys. you know. So this has been a super fun experience. You know, I thank everyone for tuning in. Armand, thank you so much for moderating. And I would definitely want to keep this conversation going. So feel free to continue writing in your questions. You can also find me on my website, which is www.kalenabovell.com, and feel free to contact me so that we can keep this conversation going. You know, I think it's so important, and I always want to connect with as many people as possible. So before we go, any more questions, comments, concerns?
Actually, you just got a very, very, very good one.
Yeah.
Julie says, kids in rural Western Tennessee don't have any access to string instruments, and many no band nor choir at all. Friends in my area have worked really hard to help start nonprofits here to help support the arts, but access to a youth symphony in my area is a distant dream. Any words of wisdom to wave a magic wand to help those students from the communities who might love strings and want to be part of such organization but have no access?
You know, that's a really great question. I think the first thing that we can do in terms of maybe starting to get some access is try to find the local music stores within your area and see if they have some type of rental program set up. And then also either go to your administration or maybe go to your district to see if either funding can be raised or if some type of access can be granted to find money in order to be able to rent instruments for these students. You know, I think another thing that you can do for students that don't have access is to play videos for them. You know what I mean? Again, it's all about bringing that awareness to a student. So even if it's play an orchestral video or play a video about an orchestra in your classroom so that students can at least know what is out there for them. But I think also just kind of having that information for them and giving them the opportunity to say, like, yes, this is something that I would like to continue pursuing, and then just kind of taking it from there. But that's a really great question. And, you know, I would love to speak with you off video to continue that conversation because, again, really, really great question and really important question.
Right, no further questions here.
Okay. So. Well, I think that, sadly, I think that we are at the end of our video. So again, or at least at the end of our talk. So again, thank you all so much for tuning in. Armand, you have been fantastic. And so I'm sure I'll be talking to you later. All right, so everyone be sure that you tune in weeknights, Monday through Thursday at 8 p.m. Central Time to watch Keeping the Beat live, and remember to tell your friends about our program. Presenters who wish to apply to host an episode send applications via tnmea.org.org, and thanks for watching. See you on the next one. Thank you.